Yeah. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's noon already. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I want to welcome us to today's session of the Tech Skills Showcase Launch Talk. We're happy to be here. We're glad you're joining us again for this session. For those who are joining us today for the first time, I want to say you're welcome. Trust me, you have a lot to go with, as in you have a lot to take away, So be prepared, pay attention, and take down notes. It's going to help you a lot. We have guests joining us over the lunch hour each day. We're presenting leaders, innovators, job creators in the Saskatchewan tech sector. Kindly ensure to take away insights, take away tips, and take away, tools that will guide you, in your career as you go forward. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here across Saskatchewan, which exists on the territory of treaties 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10. This land is the traditional territory of the Cree, Assiniboine, Sotex, Lakota, Dane, and Dakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. My name is Lami Jibrin. I'm a volunteer with Regina Open Door Society. I will be anchoring this session, and I'll also assist in facilitating the question and answers. Joining with me here to take care of housekeeping and ensure that we have a smooth ride on this session is Willow Logger. Welcome, Willow. The speaker will be glad to respond to each of your questions. You're welcome to type in your questions in the question and answer feature, or you can also type in your question in the chat box. Please note that this session is being recorded, and the link will be shared to our clients, communities, and those who are not able to be with us on this session. So please, if you wouldn't want to be recorded, please make use of the chat box and also the question and answer feature so that the video does not capture you. But if you don't mind, please go ahead. You can raise up your hand and then we'll attend to you. So I'll go straight ahead, in order not to waste more of our time. I'll just go straight ahead and introduce our guest. Our guest for today is Dr. Aaron Ginest. Sorry, I hope I pronounced that correctly.
All right.
Okay. He is the president of SaskTech and the representative for Siemens Software. SaskTech, founded in 2018, is an industry advocacy group. Over 150 organizations and businesses with corporate offices in Saskatchewan. Its goal is to address the technology labor shortage by working with government, educational institutions, and support agencies to ensure a robust labor force for technology and digital industries over century. Dr. Ginest is a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan, the former director of customer experience at Solido, and is now application engineering manager of Siemens Software after the acquisition of Solido. He is an advocate for tech sector in Canada in his role as president of SaskTech and an advisor to universities, colleges, and government on topics related to technology, labor, intellectual properties, and workforce training. Prior to his life in technology, He was a professional touring musician for 10 years. Wow. Interesting. He lives and works, he lives and works in Saskatchewan with his wife, Dr. Emily Jenkins. He's blessed with 3 lovely children. So join me, please, in welcoming Aaron Gines. You're welcome.
Thank you, Lemmy. I really appreciate the editorializing. That's great. um, so it's very much my pleasure to be here today to help provide whatever input I can that would be of value. It's a little bit awkward representing an organization that sees a major gap in the number of people that we need to be able to supply the tech labor force in Saskatchewan, while recognizing that there are lots of people who are underemployed and seeking employment and qualified in that tech sector. And so really important that we figure out together why there is a disconnect between those of you who are seeking jobs in our industry and the jobs that we have available in this industry. Why are we not connecting the dots effectively? And with the ultimate goal, of course, of not only ensuring that anybody who wants a job in this sector and is able to become qualified and attain that job, but also that we are putting enough people into the sector to be able to support the growth that we're seeing. So I wanted to start today by sharing my screen for just a little bit and talking about some of the reasons that we know that both the sector is growing and that there's a gap in terms of labor, as well as what those jobs look like across the province. So I'm going to start by sharing right here. And you should now be able to see my web browser window, which has the Labor Market and Economic Impact Initiative study on it. So this is a study that we did a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, with an organization called Sask Interactive, which is an organization that represents digital media organizations and technology companies in Saskatchewan. They're funded through Creative Saskatchewan, which is a branch of the government. And so they don't do the same kind of advisory stuff that we do, but they do have events and membership. They're funded. SaskTech isn't funded. So Sask Interactive is funded. And one of the things they did for us was a review of what the technology sector, the labor market looked like, and the economic impact. And this is really important for a couple of things. First of all, the government of Saskatchewan has several levers that they can use to be able to influence things like who is coming into our province through immigration. What are we supporting in terms of training through our post-secondary institutions, through Sask Polytechnic, through the University of Saskatchewan, University of Regina, our northern colleges, Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology. How are we hooking up the engine of the labor market and the laborers effectively? And none of those are easily answered unless you have data to support that. So let me just, for some reason, can't get off the top here, so I'm just going to tap over. And so I'm going to look at a couple of the things here. So first of all, what we looked at in terms of the technology sector was identifying what a tech worker was. And that turns out to be very difficult to do because we see tech workers in every segment of the economy, not just in what you might think of for software development and the FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Google. But in fact, technology workers are present in healthcare, in mining, in energy, in agriculture, in commerce. When you look at that, we identified 3 categories. We identified tech workers in tech industries like mine. I work at a software company. And most of us are technology workers, me included. And then there were non-tech workers in tech industries. And it turns out that sales teams, marketing teams, administrative people, financial people, HR, all of these workers actually make up more of the workforce than do the tech workers in tech industries, which is kind of interesting. It means that for every one of you as technologists who enter the labor force, you're supporting 1.2 additional people who will be able to join those tech companies. Then we also saw that there are 20,000 tech workers, or 20,000 plus tech workers in non-tech industries. And so this would be the mining and finance and energy and agriculture and commerce. All of those organizations are hiring tech workers, and that actually is a significantly larger number than the actual core tech industry itself. So this is kind of an interesting mismatch that emerges right away, is that when I talk to people seeking jobs in tech, they're frequently looking for, I want to go work at a game company, or I want to go and I work for an IT company to do networking, or I want to go and work for a software company who's building calendaring software or simulation software or something like that. But in fact, that's the minority of the jobs. The odds are that you could get a job more easily in a non-tech industry as a tech worker. And in some ways, those jobs are both easier and harder to get. And I'll get to that a little bit. What was important messaging for us to the government is that a lot of this, that these industries, that the tech industry provided an enormous fiscal impact on the economy in the province, 5.6% of our GDP. And this kind of doesn't seem to matter to you as a worker a whole bunch, except that understand that this is important for leveraging how much attention the government is paying to supporting people who are trying to get into this industry. And the companies that are there. It's also the fastest growing sector in Canada and in Saskatchewan. And so this 5.6 number is really from 2018. We're 3 years later, barring COVID, we still would see a significant increase here, both in terms of the actual number, but also in terms of the percentage of the economy that is technology driven. So this is kind of the high level overview of what the sector looks like. And then we can kind of pull into what the employment side looks like. So we had industry computer systems design in Saskatchewan employed about 3,700 people. And that is about 7% of the workers in the province. And so when you think about that, it means that close to 1 in 10 people is employed in some aspect of working on computers or with computers to accomplish outcomes beyond using software, but in terms of creating software, selling software, implementing or installing software and supporting it. And so this is quite a few workers. We're employing well over 200 new workers every year. And that actually is a number that's a little bit odd, because in 2015, it would have been quite low. It would have been below 100, and it scales rapidly. So I think in 2018, it was 300 people. And so these are just the direct jobs. So they're definitely out there. And we can get them. And once again, we have some fiscal impact and some GD impact. So this stuff is probably a little bit more interesting. What should you be asking for if you're working in the tech sector? What should you be expecting for a salary? And so this is, and I should say all of these flyers as well as the full report are available on the Sask Interactive website. So that's saskinteractive.com. You can see it up on my window here. But in 2018, the average employee in the tech sector in Saskatchewan was earning just about $76,000. So obviously that's not a starting wage, but it's highly competitive. As you can see, it's slightly above the national average. It's below what you would see in Alberta or Ontario or BC or Quebec, but it is one of the highest paid areas here. Now, part of that is a skew because our mining and energy sectors have very highly paid consultants in it. And so if you are specialized as an engineer in these areas, you are probably getting paid quite high wages when you are employed. And so when you're not employed, however, is the rub. And as we know, a few years ago, we had a mining downturn in the province. At that point, hundreds of tech workers came on the job market seeking jobs because they were no longer able to be employed by the engineering firms that were expecting to be able to build the mines and build the machinery for mines in the province. We also had an energy downturn at the same time. And so I personally must have interviewed 30 people who were highly qualified engineers looking to shift from mining directly into software. And that was a very hard go of it. And I'll get to that in a minute. But the good news is that the wages in Saskatchewan are competitive, even relative to the jurisdictions around us. And the really good news is that your take-home income is pretty good. And so the cost of living here remains lower than in many of the other jurisdictions. And so while you might earn more money in Toronto, your take home as a percentage of your income is significantly lower. And so Saskatchewan remains a really good place to get a tech job in. And we're very young, so there's a lot of upside in terms of the growth, the potential for growth. Here's the rub, is that in the tech sector, the educational attainment is at least a bachelor's. And so 37% holding a university degree. What this is saying is that probably that's about 70% of the workers, the tech workers in tech roles. And remember that before we had looked at the division of, oopsies, am I in the wrong one? Tech workers in tech roles. I can't remember where that slide was, and my apologies here. Fiscal impact. Okay, I can't find my slide now, but remember that we divided this to tech workers in tech roles, non-tech workers at tech companies, tech workers at tech companies, non-tech workers at tech companies, and tech workers at non-tech companies. And the non-tech workers at tech companies have a higher percentage of not having a university degree in those jobs, whereas the tech workers have a higher percentage of that. However, there's a fair number who have a certificate or diploma from Sask Polytech or a college, and they are actually quite employable as well. And so the trick here is understanding that in general, education gets you into the sector, and the more education you have, generally, I have a PhD. Let me tell you that it's very hard to get a job in industry with a PhD. Everyone thinks you're overqualified, or you're going to leave and join and become an academician. But really, I'm not. And so I've spent some time convincing people that I am staying. But generally speaking, getting a bachelor's or master's is one of the best ways to get into the tech sector. And so the salary is pretty good, and it's competitive in terms of what your take home is in the province. So this is all really good news. It's a little bit complicated if you're actually trying to get in here without a bachelor's degree. Things tend to be a little bit more difficult. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then, as you can see, we continue to add computer programmers and interactive media developers, and information systems analysts and consultants, and all of these things. So that out of the 5 top categories of jobs added over that 4-year period, 4 of them were in technology related spaces. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, come back here. Okay, so why is it hard then to get a job? 80% of our hires remain, and this is kind of across the whole industry, about 80% of hires are social hires. They're people who are known to somebody who's already at the company. This has creates a very complicated environment. It's very easy to trust that somebody who you've already employed and know is going to make a recommendation for somebody who is going to be similarly competent. It's very difficult to reach out into a pool of unknowns, especially if the graduates come from universities with which you're not familiar with the programs, and higher. The result of that is that entering into the community of people who are employed in technology in the province is one of the best ways to ensure that you're actually going to be able to interview for jobs rather than just submitting resumes. And so there are a few ways to do that. The first is that Hack Regina and the Open Door Society are doing a fantastic job of this. This kind of event is one of the first stepping stones into that, and the outreach in terms of getting people from industry to start paying attention to the community and become part of the community is absolutely critical. And so the involvement of Hack Regina, the involvement of the Open Door Society, and the involvement of Ministry of Immigration and Career Training is going to be critical in terms of building those bridges. There are already some existing organizations out there and events out there that would be worthwhile. For instance, there's a free to sign up to Pi Hour that is co-sponsored by Innovation Place and Siemens, my company, that runs once a month and is public. Right now it's entirely virtual, but if you go to the Innovation Place website, you'll be able to find some links to that. It's free. And it gives, there are industry conversations with key industry speakers, but also breakout rooms where you have an opportunity to meet some new people. Once we're into a little bit of a post-pandemic normalcy, whatever that looks like, I imagine that we will be having in-person meetings again for that. Those have generally been in Saskatoon, but there are similar kinds of events run in Regina. You could certainly look for them around our incubators. So in Regina, there is something called the Cultivator, powered by Connexus, which is a technology incubator. And that incubator has events that happen several times a year. Some of them are open to the public. Some of them are a little bit more industry inside, but you can just register and go to. You don't. Most of them are entirely free. And it's an opportunity to meet early stage companies and the community of people who are being entrepreneurs in that space, and find out not only what's happening, but what skills they're looking for, and be able to engage socially with them. In addition to that, they're shut down at the moment, but you could watch for the Developer Talks series. 7 Shifts in Saskatoon has been hosting those. They are a little bit more technical in nature, and they're always looking for presenters. So if you have some industry experience somewhere else and would like to bring that perspective to the employers here and the people currently working in the industry, that would be a really valuable way for getting your name out there as somebody who is an expert or an emerging expert in a field. Or even if you're not an expert and have just had an interesting experience, sharing what employment in a tech sector looks like in a different place from somewhere else around the world would be really valuable, both to you in terms of getting yourself known, but also to us as a sector, so that we can start taking some of the richness of the experiences from around the world and incorporating it into the way that we build software and build our communities. So those experiences are incredibly valuable, and so don't hesitate to be a speaker at those events. The lowest bar for being a speaker and the most welcoming community in that context is oh goodness, I had it just a moment ago. All right, I'm going to come back to that one as soon as my ancient mind unearthed it from what I was saying. Bar camp, there we go. Bar camp. Bar camp runs sometimes Saskatoon in Saskatoon. Sometimes there's a bar camp event in Regina, and these are opportunities once again to just sign up to speak or sign up to attend and get to know the larger community. Some of these seem slightly alcohol fueled. That fortunately is a trend that we're moving away from. I think as most of our employees grow up a little bit and the senior leadership grows up, recognizing that that's not really the way to run events and be inclusive. But at some of these events, alcohol is served, and so your comfort level with that you'll need to manage by yourself. But recognize that if that is actually an issue, it's definitely worth reaching out to the organizers of these and asking them what opportunities there are for non-alcohol based events. And I would encourage you to do so. There are a few other places. There is a Slack channel for Saskatoon developers. I don't know how to get somebody invited to that, but that seems to have about 100 people who are developers in Saskatoon. Searching for open Slack channels might uncover that one for you. There are increasingly opportunities for a wide variety of events. Innovation Place is a really good sponsor of those. The reason I'm bringing all of these up is not for you to go and hand out your resume at these events, because that actually won't work at all, and it's probably a way to shut things down quickly. But it is an opportunity for you to go out and find out what people are looking for and be able to talk about your own experiences in a relatively low pressure environment. Applying for a job after you've met some of the people to whom you're applying is a relatively easy thing. At that point, then you can message them and say, hey, I threw my resume into the pile. And then it seems quite likely that your resume is going to get read and you're going to get that interview rather than it coming just cold. And it's still a very small community. If you spend a couple of months going to every one of these events, learning who people are, talking a little bit about what you're doing and what you're looking for in a job, you'll probably be able to find a job in fairly short order. It may not be exactly the job you're looking for right off the bat, but it will be something to get your feet under you and to get the experience in the local tech environment. But let's talk about skills. What are people looking for? We're not looking for certifications. Generally speaking, unless you're applying for an InfoSec job, certifications don't matter. It is helpful for people to understand if you have done certifications or if you've done continuing education or if you've gotten a degree, what the specific skills that you learned were. It's not particularly helpful to have a list of 50 languages that you can code in. What's much more useful is to give us a story about why you know that particular language. I had to teach myself Python because the project I was working on really needed a stats package. There wasn't a good stats package in a different language. I wasn't happy with that. So I had to go and figure out that library and implement a portion of this project in Python. I'm not an expert, but I managed to bootstrap myself to that point. So I can probably learn what else you need me to do. That kind of statement or that kind of story that you can tell about the learning of technology, self-motivated, or if it was taught to you and you applied it as part of a course, is far more compelling than just listing something on a resume. One of the reasons for that is that every company in this province expects that they're going to have to train you. And so we're actually less interested in what you know and more interested in what you're going to be able to learn, how you're going to learn that, how open you are to learning that. And somebody who situates themselves as an expert and then comes into a technical interview and doesn't actually pass the technical interview with flying colors is going to be rated lower than somebody with less technical experience who does worse on that technical interview, but rates themselves slightly lower going into it. Because the understanding of where your own gaps are and representing those correctly to your employer are going to be critical in being able to take those next steps on your learning journey through employment. And so we hire a lot of junior people at my company. They do it 7 shifts. They do it Viamo. They do it at Calendar. They do at Ango. And all of those employees, they expect that they're going to have to train for months before they're significant contributors to the organization. In my own part of the organization, we expect that we train people for 6 months to a year before they're fully contributing. And it's on us to be able to do that. And so you want to situate your applications for jobs with the understanding that you are going to learn things. Talk about how you have learned things. Talk about where the gaps are. Talk about where you're still learning things. We're not looking for people who are going to dedicate their lives to this. You don't need to be passionate about programming. It doesn't need to be every living moment of your life, but it should be something that you appreciate the craft of, that you think about problems, that you can say, I sometimes solve them in the shower instead of solving them in front of a computer, just because, you know, that's the way your mind works. You noodle around on it. Most of us have pretty flexible employment options. And we expect that people sometimes have off days and don't work very well, you know, from 9 to 5. And the result of that, or the trade-off in that, is that we also know that the people that we're employing tend to have minds that are going to noodle away at things, even when they're not necessarily at their desks. And so we're not looking for people who are deeply passionate about it, but we're looking for people who are maybe entranced, is a good word, by a complicated problem. And you know, such that you are going to be able to talk about those problems at those community events that I was mentioning in a way that shows your interest and enthusiasm for that kind of problem, even if it doesn't relate to a success that you've particularly had. And so those kinds of approaches to telling your own personal story really do matter. So where is the disconnect right now in terms of people getting jobs? One of the biggest and fundamental things is that we've spent a long time bringing people with some of the wrong skills into this province. We did a really good alignment about 15 years ago, recognizing that some of the primary drivers in terms of the technology labor force were engineering companies and our crown corporations. And so people who needed to be able to do network management and data network analysis and support those kinds of activities were very high on the list. Also a little bit more kind of interactive media stuff, but it turns out that the really the plethora of positions that are available now are a little bit more generic, full stack software developers for web applications and machine learning, AI, and data-based data-based, I guess is the best way to put it, but data analysis jobs, data scientists, people who understand, you know, what the ML, applied ML aspects of Python stats packages look like, people who are able to write components of software for larger enterprise systems, rather than people who are aiming primarily at kind of network and telecom communications. That's unfortunate. It means that we probably have about 400 or 500 highly qualified technologists in this province who are driving taxis, working at restaurants. And we would very much like to have them in this workforce. And so there are emerging some programming at both University of Saskatchewan, University of Regina, and Sask Polytech that are aimed at trying to bridge that gap to some extent. If you have experience as a technologist in another field, especially telecom or network, and you're looking to bridge into that, into a more pure play software writing job, where I think you'll find an easier time of getting the job, I would encourage you to reach out to those organizations in the extension divisions or the continuing education division at Sask Poly and inquire about those opportunities. There is a cybersecurity certification program offered through Sask Poly in Regina that is, I think, excellent and would really help. There's a high demand for people with cybersecurity expertise, particularly in, and this is going to be odd, particularly in mining. So if you are looking for a job at Connexus or K+S or Mosaic or Nutrien, and you have cybersecurity expertise and some data analysis ability, you're probably going to be able to find a job there in fairly short order. People with automation experience in other industries who are going to add some coding experience, even if it's self-taught, that would be available as well. In any case, that's, I think, kind of I'm throwing a lot of stuff at the wall here in the hopes that we'll get something to land and to be helpful in an overall survey of what's going on. I should tell you that the challenge of matching highly qualified immigrant workers to the most valuable jobs that we have in the province is one that is front and center in every policy discussion in this province right now around labor and the economy. It is really important that we understand where the gaps are. So your own personal story about your journey, both through your education and immigration and your job search, is one that we need to hear. It needs to be told to the Open Door Society. It needs to be told to immigration and career training as they get involved in this. And it needs to be told to the employers who are trying to interview you. Be sure to tell that story because it is part of a narrative that not only will help in terms of your own personal employment, but will help us create the structures that are going to help the next person. Thank you very much for your time today. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Dines. Wow, awesome. Very insightful, very, very informative. So much to learn, so much to take comfort with. I'm just learning. Like, I mean, you don't have to say what you know. Just tell them your story. Tell them your story. Show them you're enthusiastic. That you are trainable and you are ready to learn. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Tin. So the floor is open for questions. Please type in your questions into the chat box, into the Q&A feature, and Dr. is here to attend to each and every one of them.
Oh, business analyst. That's a question that just popped up. Do you have any recommendations for a learning path for business analysts? I'll be honest, this is one of our primary gaps. There's going to be a Western diversification. That's a federal department. A federal study on the gaps in the tech startup industry that's going to be coming out in the coming weeks. And I got a sneak peek at that. And technology business analysis, business development, enterprise sales, technical marketing. These are actually the largest gaps that we have as a province in terms of the skills that we need. And I work as an executive in residence for Foresight Clean Tech Accelerator and as a mentor for Collabs and Cultivator, the two incubators in the province for technology companies. And I would say that 3 to 4 times a month, I have a conversation with a company, and that's the gap. That they need to be able to do it. I would suggest that business analyst needs to be recast to some degree. Calling yourself a business analyst is a little bit vague and focuses on large companies that have a whole bunch of process in place already. Whereas there's a huge market across smaller companies and mid-sized companies and scaling companies for business development, which is not really all that different. It's kind of understanding where the product market fit is, understanding where what your take is in terms of the marketing stuff, what your internal capacity is, how you can fit your R&D work into a channel that's going to turn into business in both this quarter, but also a year from now and 5 years from now. Should be working tightly with a technical sales team, which is also underrepresented. Those would be people, actually my team is a technical sales team. They're people who bridge the gap between the customer and the R&D team, and they understand what the needs are of the customer. They understand the capacity limits of the R&D team, and so those kind of bridging organizations that help build up the capacity of the organization by connecting customer and research and development and business sides all together are by far and large the largest gap, whatever you call them: business analysts, business development, technical sales, enterprise sales. How do you get there? Well, if we knew that answer really well, the problem would be solved. We don't have good training in the province for this. And I actually just finished a call with the University of Saskatchewan, and I've set up a meeting with the with Sask Polytech on this, trying to figure out what that looks like at a startup scale, at a scaling scale, and for getting senior talent in. Our first answer is, let's go out into the broad worldwide market and bring those people in, but they're in demand in every jurisdiction in the world. So the next question is, how do we train that? The easiest answer, I would say, is go and fill one of those adjacent roles first. So go and do some R&D, or go and become part of a marketing team or a sales team. Marketing teams and sales teams tend to have very high turnover, but so there's a fairly good chance of getting hired on that to give it a shot. And the reason they've got a high turnover is they're really, really hard jobs, and there isn't enough training on them. So getting through one of those jobs, a marketing or sales job, for a couple of years, and then putting your mind to how could a business analyst angle on that improve the organization, gives you a chance to transition into that job, or grow into that in at another company. And so I really tend to think that at the moment, while we're getting our feet under us in terms of understanding what kind of curriculum and continuing education we might be able to provide to direct people into those programs, I think that getting yourself hired into an adjacent role and being very clear once you get there that you've got an interest in the business analyst and business development side would put you on a really good path for that. As the engineering opportunities are shrinking, are there IT organizations willing to absorb and train interested engineers into tech and IT? Not working while transitioning, transiting is tough for new immigrants. No kidding. I have over 10 years engineering experience in diverse industries with little or no opportunity in Saskatchewan. I am so sorry. Yeah. Part of it is that we have this incredibly protectionist view of engineering in the province. And that means that we've actually limited the roles that engineers are seen as being effective in. Yes, it depends on what your background is in. If your background is in engineering physics, which would surprise the hell out of me, but if it is, I think you're employable anywhere. Honestly, engineering physicists usually are at the top of the pile in our hiring because they're just so darn interested in problems. However, if you've got an electrical or computer engineering background, there's a set of companies that are really good candidates. Calian in Saskatoon hires for that. ISM in Regina hires for that. The Vecima Networks here in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon, also hires for that. They tend to be engineering heavy hardware design companies. If you have some circuit design background at any level, Microchip has circuit design and verification teams both in Saskatoon and Regina, it's my understanding. And there's a few other opportunities there. Most of those would be willing to transition. Now, if your engineering background is in mechanical, chemical, or civil, the story is a little bit more complicated for a transition. I think the best bet as an experienced engineer is to leverage your domain experience into a company that has that domain, that's working in that domain, but in the process of a digital transition. And so once again, I'm coming back to mining because Nutrien, for instance, is putting $5 billion in the next few years into a digital transformation. Part of that's going to be hiring engineers who want to transition to a more digital job and training them in the digital component of their job while they leverage their domain knowledge. But also we've got a burgeoning ag tech sector that's going to require a lot of mechanical background and some chemical background as well. And that you can start with places like Precision AI, which just got $600,000 of seed funding in Regina. And it's no doubt going to use that to hire some people. And so if you can convince them that you have the kind of mechanical background or chemical background that would be of advantage to them, that's a good place. I'm seeing more and more opportunities in upstream oil and gas as well, particularly around predictive maintenance. So if we have people who have experience at drilling sites, setting up drilling sites, or pipeline work, then or even midstream stuff, then I think that there's a fairly burgeoning startup or set of organizations that would be there, would be a good place to go. And you would be able to transition into learning some of the skills necessary. These are places where the domain experience is incredibly valuable, where understanding how these processes work is the first step in terms of being able to sell and build the software. It's going to take some creativity, and it's going to take a little bit of fast talking. I'm not going to lie, but I'd really encourage you to go there. Now, that reminds me, the startup sector here is desperate for certain kinds of talent and for people who are ambitious to do it. If you don't want to found your own company, if that's not quite what you're ready to do, that's fine. But you should go and visit Cultivator. You should go and visit Collabs. You should talk to their executive people, their executive directors, Matt in Saskatoon and Jordan in Regina. And you should talk to the rest of their staff, get to meet those companies, understand what they do, go to their live events and figure out where those gaps are and go and approach them. Tell them, hey, I'm a highly qualified engineer with 10 years experience in a domain that's very adjacent to yours. I think I could be of huge value to your organization. You might not be able to command the same starting salary as you might be looking for, given the kind of experience that you have, as especially as a professional engineer. On the other hand, there's stock options that you should be arguing for, and that certainly didn't hurt me when our company got acquired. So I highly recommend that kind of approach.
Okay. There's this question. It says, is working in tech stressful? Whenever I am working on my personal project, I set a goal and due dates, and a lot of sometimes I pass them. That is when that question comes up. Like, is working in tech stressful? Is it stressful?
Okay, that's a really good question. It's going to depend on the company and what you do. In general, working in tech is no more stressful than any other job, and it generally has more flexibility in terms of work-life balance. We're able to support working from home more often. I have a young child, 2.5 days a week right now because he can't go into summer camps. I'm at home taking care of him at the same time as trying to work. I know I'm not getting as much done in those 2.5 days as I am when I'm in the office, just because I have a child around, not because I'm working at home. But you know what? My team and my boss and the people who report to me all understand that and all help me adjust and manage that, because we've all had to do it for them as well. And we know that in the end, keeping people with our company and that experience and development, and keeping people a lot of our thinking happens when we're not in front of a computer, as I just said. That's very valuable. And so we work really hard to make sure that people manage that. That goes for, paternity and maternity leave as well. Understanding we expect that our employees are going to be walking away from their job for months at a time and coming back in. We want to make it as stress-free as possible for them to come back in and catch up on the 8 months of stuff that they missed, or the 14 months of stuff that they missed. We want them to be able to reintegrate into the team effectively. And so I think in a well-functioning tech organization, you have a strong team supporting you. In a startup environment, it's a little bit harder. There are startups that have this nailed. And I'd say that older founders who've been around the block, maybe through a couple of companies, and understand that this isn't going to be a matter of burning the midnight oil and working 18 hours a day for 7 days a week for 3 years is going to be the success of their company. People who are instead building organizations that are built to create a culture that will scale nicely, they're the ones that are going to do well as well. And you should be able to identify that in an interview. I would encourage you to not hesitate to ask questions in your interviews of the company that try and help you understand what that kind of culture is that you're getting. And I want to actually, as it turns out, I wrote about this, so I'm going to just share that in the chat, and then it might help you get there. Ask some of the relevant questions. I am going to suggest, however, that in my experience, people tend to be hardest on themselves. And so when you're saying, you're missing kind of self-imposed deadlines and feeling awkward about it, I get that. It makes sense to me, but the indication that you're a little bit anxious about passing your own deadlines indicates that you would be a pretty solid employee, because we look for people who are trying to, who are basically self-motivated. There's nothing wrong with missing a deadline. There's nothing wrong with, having something unexpected come up. The problem is if nobody knows that that's happening. And so we emphasize on our teams an enormous amount of communication to try and ensure that you're really well aligned with, that your bosses are well aligned with what's occurring, that your teammates are well aligned with it, and it allows us to plan for emerging problems with missing deadlines, rather than enforce kind of 12-hour days and crunch efforts. Our industries and most of the tech industries in the province are actually really strong in that way. Some others might not be, and it's hard to know. You'll have to actually ask each individual company how they're doing. Here is the link to the article I wrote about asking your job interviewer some questions to try and get at some of those cultural elements. So I'd encourage you, if I hope it helps. I have no idea if it will, but good luck.
Like prior to coming to Canada, I remember when I was back in Nigeria, I have friends here. So I called one of my friends and I was like, "Come, how is it like working in Canada? I mean, is it stressful? And she was like, "Oh, in Canada, work is stressful. In short, every work is stressful. There's always like, you have to ensure you keep to, you keep to deadlines, because every job they have deadlines. So ensure when you keep to deadlines, then you are good. But keeping up to deadlines is stressful, So, so it's good. It's just knowing what to do, and actually, taking up your job and doing them.
I think that a good employer recognizes that you need a deadline because it gives you something to aim towards. And in the end, companies are about making money, most of them, and we need to have a highly operating team to make sure that it is, but that nothing is done by one person. You can't accomplish anything with just one person doing it. Nothing of value, of real value. And so a team is really about sharing that deadline and managing the stress of that, and communicating if it's impossible, and negotiating to try and figure out what is reasonable and what can be accomplished. And we get messaging from our team all the time that it's just not possible to do something that they've asked to do. And so we have to tell them instead, we go to our customer and tell them, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. Now we have, we might be unique, right? But I don't think we are. I think that there are lots of companies like that in the province. Just go find them.
Yeah. So any more questions for us? Yeah.
I see one more
Yeah, there's
question
someone
here very
here. Yeah,
quickly.
yeah.
And I'll just then have to finish off because unfortunately I have to run.
Okay.
But it's mentioned a lot in the beginning, and one question up is what's the salary of university graduates versus coding bootcamp graduates or self-taught? I can tell you that the difference between a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in a starting salary is somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 a year. That would be what I would expect. I would expect if you're coming out with an undergraduate degree in computer science or engineering and going into coding, a research and development, a developer position rather, you could expect somewhere between $55,000 and $70,000 depending on the company. Crown corporations and engineering firms tend to pay more. Engineering firms lay off more frequently, and so you kind of have to say, what's a job search going to cost me after that? So if that's what you're comfortable with, earning a slightly higher wage and then having 3 months of unemployment while you find another job, then that's one angle. Startups are going to pay less, but have more options in the event that you end up having a financial event for an IPO or for acquisition. They also have higher chance if you're in at the ground floor of being more senior later on and in a scaling company, which is a good advantage. And Polytech grads with a certificate out of a 2-year IT program should be able to command that 50 to 60 range. I think it's quite reasonable. Self-taught is a little bit harder. I would argue that if you're a self-taught developer, what you should be doing is leveraging your other domain experience and saying, I have a degree in engineering, or I have a degree or a certificate in business development, or I'm a marketing expert, or whatever those are, and then try and place yourself there and add on the technical experience to that and be looking for a commensurate salary. That will be highly dependent, obviously, on the other experience that you have and can bring to bear. I hope all of that helps. I'm really sorry to have to go, but I'm actually 1 minute advising a company now, but I very much appreciated my time here today, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and you feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you very much. Everyone, that's the much we can take today on question and answers. Please, we encourage you to take advantage of our Slack channel. Post your questions there. I'm sure they'll be attending to there. Thank you very much, Dr. Gines. We appreciate your coming. So we continue tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow lunch talk continues with Dallas Prize. So we encourage you to stay tuned with us. Be on time tomorrow, and then we'll continue tomorrow. Thank you very much all for coming once again. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day.